Just to give some context, I'm currently in the UK, and the town where I live is known for its drug scene, but it doesn't have a violent crime problem to speak of. I think that's why I found what happened so shocking, because I lived in London before, and while some messed up stuff happened to me there, it was nowhere near on the level of what happened to me earlier this year. My partner and I live together in our flat, which is in a relatively busy residential area. I work from home, however, and he's out of the flat quite a lot. So I guess it might look like to an outside observer like I live alone. Our flat complex was once an old factory, and we have these huge industrial windows, so people walking on the street have a pretty clear view of our dining room, which is where I work during the day. It all started in July of this year. I'm ashamed to say that I can be a major rubbernecker, and a lot of drama occurs on the road outside of our flat. So, I look out of the windows often during my workday for some light entertainment. The best was a 2-hour breakup that I got to watch unfold in the car just below our window, but that's beside the point. One day, I got up to make myself a cup of tea, looked out of the kitchen window, and saw this guy just staring at me. I was struck by how intense it was and how he didn't look away, even when it was obvious that I was looking back at him. I felt creeped out by it, but I tried to not let it bother me. We have a lot of drug addicts and other weird characters that hang out around here, so it didn't seem like such a big deal. I went back to work, and by the time I sat down at the table, he was gone. About a week later, my partner had gone to visit his dad for the weekend, so I was excited to hunker down and catch up on some of my favorite shows alone. After about 30 minutes, the buzzer to the flat went. The buzzer is so loud, and it scared the heck out of me. I was lucky my popcorn didn't go flying out of my hands. Now, our flat complex has this big porch where teenagers and addicts love to hang out because it provides shelter from the rain, and about 4 people can sit down inside of it. Sometimes, people lean up on the buzzers by accident when they're hanging out on the porch, so I assume that was what happened. After a few seconds, however, the buzzer went again, and again, and again. Someone was pressing it in this rhythmic pattern. It's something I know my partner does when he's forgotten his keys, and it's kind of our code for me to let him in, which is why I found it so disconcerting. At first, I was worried he might have missed the bus to his dad's house and had decided to come back to the flat. I was nearly about to buzz him straight in when I thought it would be a good idea to pick up the phone first and check who it was. As soon as I picked up the phone, the person standing near the intercom must have heard because they said, "Hello?" It was definitely not my partner. I asked who it was and why they were buzzing the flat so late at night, but all they said was, "Can you let me in?" I asked him why they wanted to come in, and they said, "You invited me, remember?" While they were talking, they kept kind of laughing under their breath, and the whole exchange put me on edge. I told them I had no idea who they were and just hung up. I was half expecting them to start pressing the buzzer again, but they didn't. After a few minutes, I crept out of the flat to have a look at who was in the porch, but they were long gone. My partner has to get up early for work, whereas I'm more of a night owl. Most nights, I'm up until around 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. working on my laptop while he's asleep. A few nights after the intercom incident, I was on my laptop watching YouTube videos, and I realized that we'd forgotten to take the trash out. This happens a lot, and it's not uncommon for me to take the trash out at around 1 to 2 a.m. At least, it wasn't until all this happened. I put my slippers on, grabbed the bag of trash, and took it out on the curb outside the flat's main entrance. When I looked across the street, there was this guy standing on the opposite street corner. He was watching me, and his eyes followed me all the way from the front door to the curb. I noticed he was smoking, so I assumed he lived in one of the houses across the street, and I remember even thinking, wouldn't it be creepy if he tried to come over here? As I put the trash bag down, I caught a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw him walking in a straight line across the road towards me, with his eyes fixed on me the entire time. I don't know how to describe it, but the look in his face filled me with an instinctive sense of dread. It felt like someone had just turned my stomach inside out. I pulled my keys out of my hoodie pocket, turned around, and ran to the front door. I've never felt that kind of fear before, and it was like my body was compelling me to get as far away from this man as possible. I got into the building, slammed the door behind me, and rushed to my flat without looking back. I didn't want to know whether he'd follow me or not. I told my partner about the whole thing the next day and how shook up I was, and we agreed that we'd be more proactive with the trash, and I've never taken it out late at night again. Fast forward to the beginning of August, about 2 weeks after the trash incident, and I'd pretty much forgotten about all of it. I was still too scared to go out late at night on the road, but nothing weird had happened since then. I went to bed at about 2 a.m., but I felt restless for some reason and struggled to get to sleep. By about 3 a.m., I was contemplating whether or not to give up and go do something else when I heard this scream. The sound cut right through me. There was something visceral about the terror in that scream. I knew it was bad because my partner went from stone cold asleep to being up in a shot. He asked me what it was, and I said I didn't know. I went to the window straight away and looked out. Down one of the side roads near our flat, I could see headlights, but couldn't get a clear view of the car. The screaming continued in bursts, and after a while, I could make out words. It was a woman, and she was saying, "Get out! Get out!" over and over again. I'm used to hearing all kinds of domestic arguments take place on the road outside of our flat, particularly since we're near the university and several popular bars. But this was different. There was this raw fear in her voice that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I turned to my partner and said I had to call the police. When they picked up, I explained what was happening, and they seemed disinterested at first, but the operator's tone changed when I told them where it was. I think they must have been getting calls from all around the area about it. It was sometime during this phone call that I heard a screech of tires and the screaming stopped. The operator asked me to go to the window and describe to them what was happening. When I looked down, there was this black car sat on the road. One of the neighbors from across the road was speaking to the two guys in the car. I had the twist to get a good look at them, but one of the guys in the car looked uncannily like the guy who had been watching me when I was putting out the trash that time. At first, the conversation seemed congenial, but it took a turn when the neighbor asked them some sort of question that I couldn't hear clearly, and they sped off down the road. Within no less than 10 minutes, 3 police cars arrived and had blocked off the roads leading to our flat. Our residential area is on a grid system. They were knocking on doors and asking to speak to all of our neighbors. I told my partner that we should go out and speak to them since we saw a lot of what happened, and my partner had had the foresight to write down the license plate of the black car. When we went out, there were these 2 girls talking to one of the police officers. They were both shaking, and one of them looked as though she had been crying. I decided to stand nearby and wait for the girls to finish before speaking with the officer myself. But what they said made my blood run cold. They were from one of the houses that looked out directly onto the road where I had seen the headlights, so they had a clear view of what had happened. Like us, they had been alerted by the screaming and gone straight to the window. From what I could gather, the black car had cut off a small red car on the road, like pulled right in front of it, and that's what had caused the girl driving the red car to scream the first time. They thought it might have been some kind of misunderstanding, but then they watched as one of the guys from the black car got out, walked to the red car, and jumped in through the window. That's the point when the girl must have been screaming for them to get out. There had been a struggle, and the girls watching said they assumed the guy was trying to steal the car. But then he forced the driver into the back seat, and that's when he drove off. The two girls were both hysterical by this point, and you could tell they felt guilty for not intervening. I could feel the same guilt seeping into my thoughts as well. After the guy had driven off in the red car, the two men in the black car had gone the opposite way and turned to the corner onto our road, but had been stopped by another neighbor. Although this neighbor had been alerted by the screaming, he hadn't actually witnessed what happened. So he stopped the black car to ask the guys what was going on without knowing that they were involved. And that was the exchange that we saw. When the guy started acting suspicious, he asked them if they could wait for the police to arrive, and that's the point when they drove off. It wasn't until we got back to the flat that I started to put two and two together. I have a small red car, just like the one that the girls had described, and I normally come back at night on that day of the week, since it's the day I go to visit my parents. I had only come back early on this particular occasion because I needed to let a plumber in to do some work on the flat. What if they had been waiting for me and they had gotten the wrong car? Over the next few days, I contacted the police several times and checked the local news, but I never heard anything about the girl who was kidnapped. I still have no idea what happened to her. All I know is that they found her car abandoned somewhere not far from where she was taken, but she wasn't in it, and it still gives me chills just thinking about it. So here's what happened. We were on a family holiday abroad years ago. I think I was 14 at that time, and my sister 16 at that time too. And the toddler was our cousin, and she was about maybe 2 years old, or maybe a bit older. So we headed out during the evening to have dinner, and just after that, we'll walk through the towns and maybe stop at a few bars for drinks. As we were walking through this town, a man who was, I'll say, badly dressed as a clown approached my sister. Bear in mind, my sister is afraid of clowns, no matter how good or badly dressed they are. She was carrying our cousin on her hip, and the clown looked at our cousin and said hello to her, making her laugh, as clowns do. And my sister, on the other hand, just froze. I was standing by watching this happening, kinda laughing at the fact that my sister was crapping herself. I was a savage sister. But the next thing I knew, without asking or anything else, he takes my cousin from my sister. And then, of course, I thought, whoa, hey! I shouted over to my parents and my aunt and uncle. My dad comes over and says, "Hey, what do you think you're doing with my niece?" As he was trying to get her back out of his arms. But when he tried to get her, the clown would just turn away or push my dad back. The clown says, "Oh, I thought you would like to take a photo. Don't you not want to take a photo?" My aunt comes over, but scared out of her mind, thinking that clowns were trying to kidnap her daughter. We all just gather around the clown, trying to pry my cousin from this clown's arms. But every time, he just kept pulling away or pushing us back. The next thing is, my dad had had enough, so he approached the clown and said, "Let go of my niece right now," grabbing him by the neck. In the end, he put her down, and my dad picks her up and hands her to my sister-in-law. Then the guy just casually says, "Oh, okay, too bad you don't want to take a photo," and hands my cousin a lollipop. We just headed back to the hotel and kinda thought nothing of it. But the next day, we saw him again as we were at the restaurant. And this time, he took someone else's kid away from the parents into some room. My dad spotted him as he came out of the toilets and stopped him, thinking he grabbed my cousin again, but it was someone else. Then he headed back to the table and ate his dinner. But then for a second, he felt something wasn't right, so he went back to the clown's room. I didn't know what went down when he went back, but he came back out holding this other kid's hand and asked her where her parents were, assuming that they were in the same restaurant. But nope, they weren't. They were at some other place. And my dad took the kid back to her parents and said, "Don't let that clown anywhere near your kids," and told them what he tried to do with my cousin. I was kind of freaked out, thinking that this clown was probably a pedophile. This happened a long time ago, when I was about 4 to 5 years old. I'm 15 now. Looking back at the situation, I really think I should have seen the red flags about this guy. But since I was really young and stupid, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, and I thought he was just a kind guy. The whole thing happened in the mall, in plain sight in front of hundreds of people. I had gone with my mother shopping, a girl's day out. You get the gist of that. At some point, I get lost in the mall. Typical. Everyone has a story like that, right? So far, no red flags at all. And I remember seeing a guy with a very southeastern accent. I thought he was from India, and he was dressed like a junkie. But in my 5-year-old mind, I thought he looked fine. So, since I was a lost 5-year-old girl who didn't know any better, I walked up to him and asked him for directions, or if he had seen my mommy, and many more. He ignored my questions, and when he saw me, his eyes lit up. He immediately started showering me with compliments. Some of them were even inappropriate to say to a 5-year-old kid. And he gave me a pink and black bracelet and told me how well it looked on me. Of course, I was oblivious to the situation and ignoring all the red flags. So at some point, he offers to take me to his fake private jet and fly me to Jamaica to relax and play with the dolphins. Basically made it sound like a child's paradise, and all I had to do was get in his car. Of course, since it sounded like a dream come true, I trusted him and almost went in his car with this creep. And I kid you not, at the exact moment that I was about to leave the mall, some dude with a suit and tie stopped him dead in his tracks and asked him where he was going with a 5-year-old girl. You could easily tell we weren't related. He had dark skin tone and I was very pale, and add that he was dressed like a junkie. It probably set off an alarm in the fancy guy's head. The guy responded with his raspy southeastern accent. "This is just my daughter's kid. I'm taking her home." We were clearly not related, and so the fancy guy asked me where my mom was. I told him she was still in the mall. And from that point on, there was some arguing between the two men. I didn't get the most of it, but I ended up with a well-dressed guy, and the junkie cursed him out. We went to the lobby of the mall and found my mom there, telling the worker behind the desk my description. She had clearly picked up by this point that I was gone. It turned out that the guy in the suit was a security guard at the mall and had picked up on how wrong the situation was. When my mom saw me with this guy, she picked me up and hugged me. This story is in fact very old, but I recently got reminded of it because one of my friends told me that they were planning on going to Jamaica for a vacation, and the memories just came flooding back. So, security guard who noticed how wrong the situation was? Thank you. And to the creep that almost kidnapped me, let's never cross paths again. When I was 17, I lived with my grandparents in a tuck-away suburban neighborhood. I was very social back then. I partied a lot and was out doing something basically every single night. I was getting home anywhere from 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. We had only lived there for maybe 6 months and only had one key. The neighborhood was all old white people and some younger families, all upper middle class, and no one drove into our street unless they lived there or knew someone who did. My family was always home, so I never took the sole house key, and the front door and backyard sliding door were always unlocked or open so I could come home at any time of the night and then lock it behind me. Also, my husky slept outside and liked to come in and out as she pleased, which is the main reason the slider was always open all night. I'll circle back to why mentioning my dog is important in a bit. Fast forward to a random night. I was out with a friend of mine. No recollection of what we did that night. Probably went to someone's house and did a bunch of coke till 3 a.m. She drives me home, 'cause I don't drive, and drops me off at about 3:45 a.m. I say bye, head inside, and lock the door behind me. I go into the kitchen and pop a cup of noodles in the microwave. About 5 minutes later, I go upstairs to my room. My room was on the second floor, directly above the garage and driveway. Looking out, you see about 50 yards away, the entrance to my street was shaped like a letter P, so anyone who drove into my street I could clearly see, and they would have to loop around and pass our house to leave via the same road. This is when I looked out of my window and saw them. My lights were already on and my curtains already drawn from when I left in a hurry earlier. I walked up to the window to shut the curtains, looked down into my driveway, where between my grandparents' 4 parked cars stood a very large man staring up into my window, dead still with a blank stare. He was Hispanic, late 20s to early 30s, about 6'2" and at least 250 pounds, wearing a red shirt. I immediately dropped to the floor, but there's no way he didn't already see me. As I dropped, I saw another man walking out from my gate, which is not visible from my window, next to the driveway, coming out from the inside towards the other man. I heard some brief speaking from the man who came out of the gate, and I couldn't understand what language it was, but it was not English. Oddly, it didn't sound Spanish either. After I dropped to the floor, I crawled to my grandpa's office, which sat directly next to my room and had a window that also faced the driveway. The lights were off in there, so I could look out without being seen. The man who I saw standing between our cars was still standing there, staring and motionless, and the other man was looking around and pointing to my house. I nearly vomited. I crawled to my grandparents' room down the hall. I was crawling because the upper level was loft style, where you can see the whole lower level and out of the glass front door and windows, which you can also see in. I frantically knocked on their door, trying to stay quiet as not to tip off this man because I wanted them to be caught and questioned by the police. My grandparents finally woke up and could barely understand me because I was shaking so badly and my words were just spilling out. My grandpa, being the fearless, grumpy old man he is, put on his robe and decided to walk outside and investigate himself. I called the cops and watched from the upstairs window to make sure nothing happened to him. By the time he went outside and stood in the driveway, the men were gone from my sight. A few moments later, a car sped out of the street, lights off, and no license plate. He told me once he came back inside that when he went out there, they were parked next to my next door neighbor's car in her driveway, with the car on but lights off and the seats reclined. He said it looked like they were sleeping, or pretending to. When they looked over and saw him, they backed out and sped off. The cops took a whooping 30 minutes to show up, didn't want my descriptions of the men or the car, and they said lock the doors, and if they come back, call the cops. They drove around my street for a bit, then left. Great, thanks for the help. My grandma thought I was just on drugs and didn't feel the level of urgency or danger that I felt. My grandpa was also very nonchalant, even though he saw them, which pissed me off and made me feel even more helpless. And I slept on the floor of their room from that night on until about 3 months later. That wasn't the end though. So, my husky, her name is Nala, and at that time she was about 2. She's small for a husky, about 50 pounds. But to people who aren't super familiar with dogs, she looks pretty threatening. She chose to always sleep outside, which is why we always left the slider to the backyard open. Literally, always. My grandparents would get pissed when I would close and lock it because she'd piss and shit in the house. Anyway, about a month or so before that night I saw those men, I was in the backyard and saw Nala chewing on something. She has possession aggression with certain things like bones, small animals, and things she's stolen. That basically means that when you go near her and she's in that state, she growls, flashes her teeth, snarls and lunges, and if you dare to reach your hand out as if to take what she has, you will lose that hand. When I walked up to her, she lunged at me. She had a steak, a rotten, moldy, obviously old T-bone steak. Looked like she'd been working on it for a while. I asked my grandparents, and they didn't give it to her. I asked my neighbors if they maybe threw her one over the fence, and they had no idea what I was talking about. I didn't think anything of it until it happened 4 more times. 4 separate occasions, I found her with a rotten meat clinging to the bone, a T-bone steak. I threw them away each time I found them, so I knew they were new. I asked my neighbors again, thinking maybe they thought I was mad they were giving my dog food and lying to me. And nothing. Like I said, this was coincidentally happening in the weeks leading up to that night that I saw those men. The event that made me start to connect the dots between the steaks Nala was finding and these men happened the second time I encountered them. Fast forward to about 3 months after the initial event, I hadn't slept in my room since, and I went on a trip to Europe to visit some family for a month. Nothing had happened since that night, but the trauma and fear were very real. It made me lose weight, and I stayed up all night listening to every noise that I heard and analyzing it, peeking out the windows every couple minutes until 6 a.m. I was a wreck. While out of the country, I came to terms with everything in my own mind and decided that I had to stop living like how I was, in constant fear. What were those men going to do to me if I hadn't seen them? If they wanted to break in and rob us, most all of us were gone during the day, most days of a week, for at least a few hours. Why wait for everyone to be home? If they were peeping Toms, they could have parked on my street and watched me all night, and I would have never known. I think they were going to try to take me. Trafficking, maybe? I should mention, I'm a model, not a known one, and had or have a decently big social media following. I do a lot of live streams, and I'm very interactive with my followers, and had been in the spotlight online since I was 13. I got back from Europe, and about a week or so later, decided I was going to finally go out again. It was the first day where I really felt okay and not so afraid. I got used to things being normal again, and was excited to move on from the whole thing. So that night, I went out. I got home earlier, about 1 to 2 a.m., and had my key this time. We started locking the doors after that night. My friend waited for me to go through my gate and get to my door before leaving. As I pulled out my keys and walking up to the door, I heard a rustling in the bushes. I thought, I'm being paranoid, it's just an animal. To help form a better picture, you walk through a 3-foot-tall swing, open gate adjacent to the driveway, and about 6 steps down a path to the front door, and a small 3-foot gate to the backyard is adjacent to the front door to the left. When I heard the rustling, I instinctively flashed my unlocked phone screen in that direction for light to look into the pitch-black backyard. And at that exact moment I did that, someone about 4 feet in front of me in my backyard flashed their phone screen as if they were investigating the same way I was. I didn't see the person, just the phone screen, which had a text convo open on it, and I noted that it wasn't an iPhone. I let out a gasp, and they whipped around the corner back into the backyard, and I bolted inside the front door. I ran to the back slider and slammed and locked it and ran upstairs while calling the police. That entire interaction outside happened in about 10 seconds. The police showed up and did nothing at all, just like before. After talking with them for a while, I went upstairs to my room and peered out of the window as they spoke to my grandparents. As I was scanning the street from the window, I heard a whistle coming from directly below me, the driveway. It was that whistle people do when they're trying to get someone's attention, or when calling your dog to you, as if communicating with his buddy, saying, "Cops are here, let's dip." My theory about the stakes is that these men were stalking me and casing our house for at least a month before I saw them that first night. They must have seen my dog, and, not knowing that she doesn't bark or attack strangers, baited her with stakes to gain her trust so that they could go into the backyard without a problem. We moved a couple months later due to something unrelated, and I never saw them again. But to this day, I struggle with the PTSD those events caused me. I have lived in constant fear and paranoia ever since, and I can't be alone at night at all. I think the reason it affects me so much is because they were never caught, and no one knows what their end goal was. And the worst part for me is, how the fuck did they find me? Did they follow me home from seeing me somewhere in public one night? Were they some of the gardeners who often mowed the lawn around me as I laid out and tanned? Were they some of the workers that redid our roof for weeks on end a month or so before any of this happened? Well, everyone on our street had their roofs redone one by one for about a month, and since I was on the top floor, I often woke up to workers sitting in my window, still adjacent to my bed with my curtains open, literally inches away from me. Did one of the workers tell a friend that there was a hot teenage girl who always left her curtains open? Did they find me through social media? Well, I'll never fucking know, and it kills me. I still hear that fucking whistle every now and then. Honestly, it might be an auditory hallucination at this point. I don't know. I'll never know who those men were, or what their intentions were. But regardless, let's not meet again. Hi everybody, it's your creepy sister here. Thank you so much for listening and watching the video. I really do hope that you enjoyed it. Anyway, if you want to send a story for me to read, or if you want to follow me on social media, my email and all the other links to my account are in the description of the video. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't yet to the channel. Once again, thanks for listening.